celebration. Thank you so much. And you know what? They look so good. Did you all give our top mock and our homecoming queen?
A Democratic strategist and a CNN political commentator, Symone Sanders rose to prominence as the press secretary for U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. At 25, Symone demonstrated an uncanny command of the issues, earning her a place in history as the youngest presidential press secretary on record.
Now, Symone Sanders draws from her experience on the national stage to provide perspective analysis on political and social issues. Her lively presentations challenge the conventional wisdom that strong communities are only defined by what we have in common. Instead, she outlines the way our differences contribute to effective social movements and inspires participants to envision a better future. Please welcome us in joining Symone Sanders.
Greetings. How y'all doing today?
Good.
I said, how y'all doing today?
Good.
My apologies for being tardy. This address is very hard to find. I'm so excited to be here today. And I think Ms. Brown is out there. I just want to ask Ms. Brown if she could throw me my phone back over here. But I'm excited because MLK events are my favorite events to do. But they're my favorite events to do because the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is so robust, and he literally, in my opinion, lived his life as a radical revolutionary. But unfortunately, we don't hear enough about the radical revolutionary Dr. King. So today, you will not hear me quote Dr. King pre-1965 because I think a lot of people know the I have a dream, what they think is peace and love and just straight up nonviolence and we shall overcome Dr. King. And I think that is an absolutely, important part of who he was and his legacy, but it wasn't all he was. And post-1965, Dr. King especially was controversial. In the aftermath of Dr. King's death, his assassination, I know some people say he gave his life. He was assassinated, ladies and gentlemen. Right. In the aftermath of his assassination, public opinion polls from across the United States, the majority of people said Dr. King brought his assassination upon himself. That's how hated he was at the end of his life. So, I want to talk about Dr. King post-1965, and I want to talk about him in terms of being a radical revolutionary, because I think in these times, in this day and age, we need a few more radical revolutionaries. Dr. King wasn't always this humanitarian, this Nobel Peace Prize laureate. He was once just a 26-year-old preacher that moved from Atlanta, which was a very quote-unquote progressive place at the time, to Montgomery, Alabama, and looked around and said, we have to do something. So Dr. King was a radical revolutionary. I want to set the scene for you post-1965. Post-1965, in 1964, we saw the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In 1965, we saw the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the Civil Rights Movement, as my millennial self remembers it from the books that I've read and the research that I've done, shifted their focus from voting rights and integration in the South to the North. And the issues in the North were just a little bit different. And that is where, in this time in Dr. King's life, he started to wage what's known as the Poor People's Campaign. But during this time, there's also the rise of the Black Panthers. These young folks, these more militant folks, these people that say that, the way Dr. King did it was all right, but that's not how we want to do it. So Dr. King was experiencing so much pushback in so many different ways and areas. And there's an interview that he did with NBC News in 1967, May of 1967, where Dr. King says, I fear that I have integrated my people into a burning house. I fear that the dream that I talked about at the March on Washington has actually become a nightmare. Post-1965, Dr. King wasn't just talking about voting rights, or integration, post-1965, Dr. King was talking about genuine equality. He knew that no one in America could realize the depth and breadth and the fullness of the American dream if they were hampered economically. Genuine equality, he said, came with addressing economic inequality. Sound familiar? So I came here today, ladies and gentlemen, to say we need a few more radical revolutionaries in the spirit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But okay, now what is a radical revolutionary? Because I say radical revolutionary, and folks are like, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, I'm glad you asked. Thank you. So first of all, I think a radical revolutionary in the spirit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is first willing to buck the status quo and take a risk. You know, a lot of people told Dr. King to stop at civil rights. They told him that you were fighting for civil rights. You were fighting for integration. You were fighting for voting rights. You got that. But Dr. King, who I believe is both an idealist and a realist, took a look at the lay of the land and realized that he had to do a little bit more. That there were so many people that were comfortable with the idea of integration. There were so many people that were complacent and happy with the idea that some folks just gained the right to vote. But Dr. King said, genuine inequality, which means economic equality. For we know now, what does it profit a man to be able to eat at an integrated lunch counter who doesn't own enough money to buy a hamburger? Dr. King said it's easier to eradicate racism than it is to eradicate the slums. It's easier to guarantee the right to vote than it is to create jobs. It's a struggle to get rid of poverty. Dr. King understood that his work was not finished, and in the true spirit of being a radical revolutionary, he was willing to buck the status quo and take a risk, because it's taking a risk to talk about poor people. It was taking a risk to take on some of his allies, which I'll talk about later, but some of these same folks that stood with him in the civil rights movement, in the fight for integration, in the fight for voting rights, to take those people on and say, you know what? We need fair housing. We need jobs. That's a risk. He was bucking the status quo. And I would venture to say, ladies and gentlemen, we need a few more radical revolutionaries in the room who are willing to buck the status quo. We need some folks that are willing to take risks. We need people that are willing to do things that are not necessarily popular, but what is right. That's what part of being a radical revolutionary is. I have to ask you, how many of us are just going with the flow of progress? You know, so many people claim to do the social justice, progressive, needle-moving work in the community or on our campus or in our schools. But if we really take stock of the quote-unquote progress we say we made, are there not gaps we have yet to fill? Are there programs we do year after year after year just because that's how we do it? Is that reaching or helping anybody else? Dr. King understood that sometimes you had to take stock of the lay of the land and say, this isn't how we're going to do it anymore. And in the spirit of being a radical revolutionary, in the radical revolutionary spirit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we need some folks that are willing to take a risk. People who are willing to speak up in the face of adversity. That's what Dr. King's dream, if you will, was really all about. Okay, so first, part of being a radical revolutionary is willing to take a risk, willing to buck the status quo. Now, secondly, I'll tell you, in my opinion, part of being a radical revolutionary in the spirit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is willing to stand in the gap for others. You know, in 2016, I served as the National Press Secretary for Senator Bernie Sanders, and I went out with him on the campaign trail. And there were many times when I first went out on the campaign trail that I would go places and I could not get into the building initially. I would go, this is pre-Secret Service, okay? Because pre-Secret Service, when you have Secret Service, you roll around in like nice big trucks, okay? The Secret Service makes sure you eat. You got special entrances, okay? To make sure you take a break. You got a little hard pit. You feel very important. But pre-Secret Service, we would roll around town in Chevy Cruises just trying to get there on time. This is in the Chevy Cruise phase of campaign life. And one week, every place days we went, I would go to the entrance, they would say, this is for staff only. I would tell them I'm staff. They're like, no, this is campaign staff. And I'm like, I have campaign staff, campaign senior staff that this thing can't get started without. That I need to get in, and I would have to call someone to come down to the door to validate that I was who I was to let me in. And it's exhausting. But 1 week it happened consistently, every single place we went. So much so that the Friday before our Saturday event, I called up our event staff, and that's the people that go before you to the event to set that thing up. And I say, hey guys, can you let them know that I'm coming at this time tomorrow? I'll be driving this kind of car, and then I'm bald, and then I'm black. And they said, Symone. I said, nope. Y'all always tell them what time I'm coming. You tell them what kind of car I'm driving. And I had issues. And I can't take it tomorrow. So can you please tell them that I'm coming at this time, I'm driving this kind of car, and that I'm bald and I'm black. Please. It's okay, Symone. Fine. I show up the next day in my Chevy Cruze. Because I have to go early. I can't go with the senator. I have to go before so I can set things up. I'm the press secretary. I actually have to do some work. And I show up at the first checkpoint in the car. They give me so much trouble to the point at the end, after 10 minutes, I exclaimed, did they tell you that I was coming and that I was bald and that I was black? They said, oh, Symone Sanders. Oh. What? There you go. They let me through the checkpoint. Go to the second checkpoint, I pull up, I hand the man my ID. They told me you was coming. I said, yes, sir, because they told you that I was bald and I was black, correct? He said, that was actually the real descriptor. That was helpful. I pull up to the third checkpoint, which is nothing but a parking spot with my name on it. It's a little piece of paper. I pull into the parking spot, get ready to gather my items and get out of the car. And these two men come running up to my vehicle, yelling all kind of expletives, telling me this isn't where I'm supposed to be, to get the F out of here. And I just break down crying in my car. This has happened to me all week. I just want to go to work. I call our advanced staff, the building security people. They come downstairs. Everybody apologizes. They take me up to the hold area. And the senator and his wife are about 20 minutes behind me. And I have to ready myself because I still have to tell them what's about to happen, everything that's about to go down. And the senator and his wife show up. I start explaining who we're about to talk to, the photos we're about to take, the press we're going to do. And the senator's wife, Jane, interrupts me after about 10 minutes. And she says, Symone, what's wrong? And I just break down crying in the ugly cry. I can't get in. Because I had never told anybody before. And I was having trouble getting in. And as I'm explaining to Jane, as I just explained to you all, the senator interrupts before Jane can respond and says, well, why can't you get in? And Jane goes, well, racism, Bernie. And I say, yes, Jane, and maybe a little ageism and sexism too. And then the senator says something that at the moment I didn't think was so profound, but it is. And it's applicable to this concept of standing in the gap. He says, well, if you can't get in, who else is being kept out of the building that we don't know about? Think about that. Part of being a radical revolutionary, particularly in the spirit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because Dr. King could have stopped at his fight for civil rights and the dignity of black people. There were many people that told him that's all he needed to do. But Dr. King viewed this fight, this poor people's campaign, this fight to address economic inequality, a fight that I believe is actually for equity. He viewed this as a plight that he could not stay silent on. He had to take stock of who else was being locked out of the proverbial building. And ladies and gentlemen, I came here today to tell you that some of us are not taking stock of who is being locked out of the proverbial building. Some of us are putting on really great panels. We sit on very fancy boards. We're involved in very nice after-school programs where we're doing change-making community work. Is that what we're calling it nowadays? But we're not taking stock of who is being locked out of the proverbial building. We are not assessing who we may be looking over or hurting in the process. And if we truly want to be radical revolutionaries in the spirit of Dr. King, we have to always think about who is not at the table, but also how we can advocate for those folks on the menu. And it seems like a tough, grandiose concept, right? There was another time when I was on the campaign trail. First rally of the new year. very poppin' peacoat from Banana Republic. I still don't know where that coat went, actually. And we had an overflow crowd. We were somewhere in the northeastern United States, because I tell people these stories and they're like, oh, this only happens in the South, and I'm like, actually happens all over America. And we go and address this overflow crowd. There's about 1,000 people outside of the senator's rally that cannot get into the actual rally. We go outside, I introduce the senator, he addresses the crowd. It's myself, our body man, the senator's body man, our trip director, who's a tall African-American man named Paul, senator's body guy, his senior advisor, and our campaign manager. So after, Bernie gets done addressing the overflow crowd, we're feeling good, we're feeling hype, okay? We're walking back in feeling very good, because at this point in time, we not only had Secret Service, we had a very nice plane. Okay? So you still had campaign money when you had a good plane, when you had good meals on the plane, things are going downhill a little bit when instead of getting the hot meals, they start serving you the deli sandwiches on the plane. But this is the hot meal phase of the campaign. Okay? The hot meal private plane phase, if I can be frank. Hence that poppin' pickup from Banana Republic. And we're walking back in to go get to this rally. It's our first rally of the new year, and all I hear behind us is, man, move! Step to the side, man, move! And I'm like, oh my goodness, that lady better move. I don't know what is going on. Man, move! Step to the side, man, move! We are like, who is this lady, and why is she not moving? Kind of find out it's a state trooper. In the aftermath, we're like, why is this lady not moving? But we're just going along our business, walking aside. Man, move! Step to the side, man, move! Next thing you know, a state trooper is yanking me. Has two hands on me, pulling me out of the senator's entourage. Paul is standing next to me, the senator is behind me, campaign manager, body person, senior advisor. Paul grabs my other arm and pulls me back this way and stops everyone with his right hand and says, what is going on? This is the National Press Secretary. The state trooper takes his hands off and goes like this, I'm sorry, I did not know. I look at him and I said, why? Because the black girl couldn't have been with Bernie Sanders. And I turn around to the senator and I say, sir, this is what I'm always talking about. And Paul looks at me and he says, are we going to let this mess with our day-to-day? I was like, no, Paul, because we have a rally to get to. And we gather our items and we go inside. Now, I'm very grateful that Paul stepped in that moment. But I will say that no one else in the entourage said or did anything in the moment. Not because I don't think they cared, not because they didn't think there was something wrong with what happened, and not because they were ambivalent to my experience. But when I say we have to stand in the gap for other people, sometimes we are faced with a choice in the moment to act, to do something. And the spirit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. demands that much like Paul, you pull me back, you stop the entourage, and you intervene. It was a very clear example that day of a way to stand in the gap for somebody else. Unfortunately, in our everyday lives, in our communities, on our campuses, in our schools, it may not be that clear cut. We have to make conscious decisions every single day on if we want to be a radical revolutionary. Conscious decisions every single day if you want to stand up or stand in the gap for somebody else. And it's not easy, per se. It shouldn't be easy. That brings me to my third point. Part of being a radical revolutionary is being uncomfortable, being willing to be uncomfortable. Dr. King was extremely uncomfortable. In that interview that I just told you about in 1967, May 1967 with NBC News, and I encourage you to Google it. You can find it online. There's a long-form excerpt. It's about 30 minutes of this interview. You can see Dr. King struggling with the hope and the optimism and the fights that he had waged over the last 12 years at that time, and the gains that he had made. And you can see him struggling, and he is visibly uncomfortable with where we are in America at that time. He's uncomfortable. And he's making some other people uncomfortable in the process of the interview. During the interview, Dr. King says, we have gained over the last 12 years, we've gained them at bargain rates. He said it didn't cost the government anything. But now, the things we're asking for, the things we're pursuing, could cost the government billions of dollars. He's talking about eradicating the slums. He's talking about getting rid of poverty. Dr. King was talking about jobs. He was talking about addressing economic inequality. That is something that costs the government something. When you look at it, Dr. King was actually right, you know. Integration, it really was an economic advantage. Integration was. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 increased civic engagement in communities all across the country. It didn't really cost the government anything. But when Dr. King started talking about poverty, he started talking about jobs, he started talking about fair housing, that's something with a dollar amount attached to it. That's something that made people very, very uncomfortable. People that were allies of Dr. King's. It made black people uncomfortable. They said, why are you doing this? Dr. King started talking about the war. Dr. King started talking about the military-industrial complex. When he spoke out about these are things that made other people and himself very uncomfortable. But you have to be willing to be uncomfortable if you really want to do any type of community change, social justice work. It's uncomfortable. So if you engage in social justice, community building, again, whatever we're calling it today, kind of work, and you're not uncomfortable, I'm here to tell you you're not actually doing the work. It should be uncomfortable to stand in the gap for somebody else. It should be uncomfortable to take a risk when you can't see the rest of the staircase. It should be extremely, extremely uncomfortable to buck the status quo. It's uncomfortable to step in on somebody's behalf. Look, it's uncomfortable to say, I know that donor gives. Oh, okay. Not here at the University of Chattanooga. I'm talking about other places. Not in the city of Chattanooga. I'm talking about other places. But for some other people, it might be uncomfortable to say, I know this donor gives X amount every single time, but they're not right, so we can't take that money. But not here. I know, not here. Other places, not in the city of Chattanooga. I'm talking about some other places. And people, it's uncomfortable, not at your schools, of course not, but some other people's schools. I'm sure it's uncomfortable for people to step in on the crass joke, on the homophobic comment, on the bullying. It's uncomfortable. But that's what the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. calls us to do. It actually calls us to be uncomfortable. Some of y'all uncomfortable right now, that means I'm doing my job. So one, part of being a radical revolutionary in the spirit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is being willing to buck the status quo and take a risk. Two, part of being a radical revolutionary in the spirit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is willing to stand in the gap for others. Three, part of being a radical revolutionary is willing to be uncomfortable. You know, there were lots of things that Dr. King did that made people uncomfortable. It wasn't just his talk about and his work with the Poor People's Campaign. It just wasn't him speaking out about the military-industrial complex and the Vietnam War. His whole strategy in the way he went about pushing the issue of voting rights and integration was controversial for many people and made people uncomfortable. It is not comfortable for somebody to get up there and say, we're going to put on our Sunday best, and we're going to walk down to the courthouse, and they're going to have the dogs out, they're going to have the hoses out, and we're going to try to vote. And somebody's like, well, hold up, sir. Usually when we try to vote, they beat us. Yes, I'm aware. Thank you. Thank you, Tom, for raising that point. When they try to beat you, do not fight back. Hold up, sir. I'm sorry. You want me to put on my church clothes and march down to the courthouse and when they sick the dogs and the hoses and they try to beat us, we not supposed to fight back? No. Do not fight back. And we're going to have the cameras there. That not only made people uncomfortable, it was controversial. Because there are many people that thought that Dr. King, there were many people. Look, I know everybody talks about him right now like they was his best friend. Even Vice President Mike Pence quoted him the other day, said, Dr. King was for the wall. Basically, that's what he said. Okay? I know everybody talks about Dr. King as though he was going to be their best friend today. But I am here to tell you they did not like this man. They did not like him. They said he made us uncomfortable, he was controversial, and all he cared about was the cameras. They said he was a media hog. But I would venture to say that Dr. King was strategic, which is another part of being a radical revolutionary. And it was strategic for Dr. King to say, we're going to do all of this, we're not going to fight back, and the cameras are going to be there, because Dr. King understood that if he was going to turn the tide in the civil rights movement, he understood that there were people in the North that had no idea about the lives of Southern folks. There were people in the North that had no idea what black people in the South went through every day. And so Dr. King knew that if he could bring the experience of a Southern black person into the living room of a white family in New York, or in Chicago, or in New Hampshire, or in Nebraska, where I'm from, that perhaps, yes, I'm from Nebraska, that perhaps the tide would change. Part of being strategic. We have to ask ourselves, are we being strategic in our coalition building? Are we being strategic in our community-changing, needle-moving work? Are we truly, while taking stock of who's being locked out of the proverbial building, do we have a plan? What is our long-term goal? I used to work in nonprofits before I went to go work in campaigns, and before I went to nonprofits, I had interned while I was in college in a lot of corporate spaces. When I got to the nonprofit world is the only place where I'm like, well, we don't got a 10-year plan. Where are all the 10, 15, 20-year plans? I used to work at the railroad company at Union Pacific in the corporate communications department. They had like a 100-year plan. Nobody at the company was going to be around when the 100-year plan was being executed, but they had one. And so I would venture to say, for the coalition building work we're doing, whether you want green lettuce in your grocery store, whether you want better food options on your campus, whether you're fighting for equity, we got to do some strategic coalition building work in the spirit of Reverend Dr. Martin King Jr. with a plan, a long-term plan, to get there. Not the times we talk about the civil rights movement as if they just like marched and they ran up in the White House randomly, had a meeting or two, marched again, ran back up in the White House, did a little interview, bam, civil rights. That ain't how it works. It's not how it works. There was a strategic plan. Part of being a radical revolutionary is being strategic. The last part, and I'll be quick, in being a radical revolutionary, and I think this is one of the most important parts, is being willing to take on your adversaries as well as your allies. And Dr. King's quest for what he called genuine equality, after Dr. King's assassination, in the year after his assassination, Congress rushed to push through what is known as the Fair Housing Act. Okay, that is something that Dr. King was advocating for prior to his assassination. There was a bill that he could not get widespread support for. They pushed through the Fair Housing Act after his assassination as an essential to pay homage, or like in his honor to do this. But when Dr. King went to Congress to ask some of these same people that were with him on civil rights and voting rights, these northern members of Congress, these northern senators, they could not be bothered with his quest for fair housing. Dr. King in that 1967 interview said, you know, we're getting so much resistance because they never expected us to go this far. Dr. King also said that he realized in this, since 1965, that so many people that were with him on the voting rights and the civil rights, they were responding to the extreme treatment of black people. They were responding to the extreme nature of Bull Connor and George Wallace. They were not specifically responding to the issue of justice and equality. And he realized that. And so in understanding that, he was like, well, we're going to have to come hold some people's feet to the fire. And honestly, far too many of us are not willing to take on our allies. We are very ready to take on our adversaries. The people we don't think like us. The folks we think that are holding back progress on the quote-unquote other side. But far too many of us are willing to take on our allies that sit next to us and work with us in order to achieve our goal. Why? Because it's uncomfortable. But I just told you, part of being a radical revolutionary is being uncomfortable. I'll leave you with this. I think that Dr. King's life demands that we are willing to do the things that have not been done before. Part of that is taking on your adversaries versus your allies. Part of that is being strategic. Part of that is willing to be uncomfortable. Part of that is willing to buck the status quo and take risks. And this moment, I think, demands us to do the things that haven't been done before. The life that Dr. King lived 51 years ago to his death, because he was assassinated in 1968, just so we're all clear on the map, colors the lives that we live today. The stuff that Dr. King was fighting for post-1965 are issues that we are still dealing with today. Much like the work that you all are doing in Chattanooga today will color the lives that people live 50 to 60 years from now. The question is, where will folks sit on the spectrum? Will your work, will your advocacy, will your words, will your coalitions have made your community a better place? I'll leave you with this poem. It's called The Things That Haven't Been Done Before, and it's by Edgar Guest. And it solidifies everything that I just talked about. And it mentions Christopher Columbus, which is very problematic for me, because the only Christopher I would like to acknowledge is Christopher Wallace. Google it. But poem. It's called The Things That Haven't Been Done Before by Edgar Guest. The things that haven't been done before, those are the things to try. Columbus dreamed of an unknown shore at the rim of a far-flung sky. Though his heart was bold and his faith was strong as he ventured to dangers new, he paid no heed to the jeering throng or the fears of a doubting crew. Many will follow the beaten track with guideposts along the way. They live and have lived for ages back with a chart for every day. Someone has told them it's safe to go on the road they have traveled o'er, and all they ever strive to know are the things that were known before. But few will strike out without map or chart where never a man or woman has been. From the beaten track they draw apart to see what no man or woman has seen. There are deeds they hunger alone to do, though bruised and battered and sore. They blaze a trail for many who do nothing not done before. The things that haven't been done before are the tasks worthwhile today. Are you one of the flock that follow? Are you one that shall lead the way? Are you one of the timid souls that quail at the jeers of a shouting crew? Or dare you, whether you win or fail, strike out for a goal that's new? Thank you.